So a question that then emerges is to discuss the history of the Commonwealth is when did the Commonwealth begin? And the Commonwealth Secretariat on their website likes to present now 1949 as somehow the beginning of the Commonwealth. That's the date it was celebrated the other year, the anniversary. The 1948-9 is the beginning of the Commonwealth as we understand it. That date is chosen because that's the date that India remained in the Commonwealth, although it had become a republic and no longer owed allegiance to the king, and therefore led to the creation of the title head of the Commonwealth for George VI, separate from the fact that he was king of several countries. So I understand that was a significant point. There's no question that was a significant, which I'll come back to later. But was that the beginning of the Commonwealth as it's now often presented? The traditional date for the beginning of the Commonwealth was always presented as 1931, which was the Statute of Westminster. What the Statute of Westminster did, and why it was always considered the beginning of the Commonwealth, was it was the document and the date in 1931 when the self-governing dominions of the Commonwealth were recognized as equal with the United Kingdom, not subordinate in any way, and also that they got full control of international as well as domestic affairs. So they became fully sovereign and fully equal with the United Kingdom, and that marked the beginning of the Commonwealth as we understand it. And what happened in 1949 was simply a further development in the Commonwealth, whereas the Secretariat presents it that the Commonwealth begins in 49 and the others are roots of the Commonwealth. So there's one of the differences. Also, even 1931 could be argued as too late a time, because the term Commonwealth was used much earlier than that, and certainly as early as 1914 in the First World War. South Africa in particular started using the term Commonwealth rather than Empire to describe what they saw what was officially still the empire that they belonged in. And through the 1920s, up to the Statute of Westminster, the term Commonwealth and Empire were both used, sometimes interchangeably and sometimes together, so that in international agreements, or the role of the empire in the world, it would be described as the participation of the British Commonwealth and Empire. And when it was used that way, it was generally understood, though there was debate among some officials and academics of whether this was explicit or only implicit, that in that context, the Commonwealth meant the self-governing dominions within the empire, and the empire meant the colonies, the non-self-governing. So when there was a reference in a document to the British Commonwealth and Empire, some people said, well, you read that as one whole. The Commonwealth and Empire was one term meaning everything. Other people said, well, no, you're supposed to read it as the British Commonwealth, the self-governing parts, and the British Empire, the non-self-governing. But either way, the term Commonwealth was already in common usage to describe the self-governing portion of the British Empire. In 1931 should be seen, and was seen by the people at the time, not as creating the new situation or status, but recognizing what was already in existence. And that is the language used at the conferences leading up to the Statute of Westminster, that this was giving legal recognition to what was already the reality of the relationship that had evolved from the First World War and in the 1920s. So the question then becomes, does it matter whether you think 1949 or 1931 or 1914 was the beginning of the Commonwealth? I think it does, because I think it reflects one's perspective of what the Commonwealth is. The argument for 1949, to my mind, suggests, because the arguments made for that date seem to suggest that the people perceive the Commonwealth as some sort of new creation, or something that was being created, whereas the earlier dates suggest in people's minds that the Commonwealth is an organic organization that evolved. It had no specific date that it was created, because the empire simply evolved into the Commonwealth, and therefore you can't put a specific date. It's not a new creation. This is what Patrick Walker talks about when he says that a country cannot join the Commonwealth. His view was that the countries all belonged to the empire, whether they were self-governing whether they were colonial, whether it was the home government in London, everyone was already a member of the Commonwealth before the term was used. What happened was, as the countries became independent, first domestically self-governing and then fully self-governing at the various stages, they did not join the Commonwealth when they became independent. So when India became independent in 1949, first in 48 when it ceased to be the Empire of India and became the Dominion, and then when it became a republic in 49, and when other countries became either an independent monarchy under the Queen or the King, or a republic, whatever, they did not join the Commonwealth. He said the situation was that they requested to remain a member of the Commonwealth in their new condition. So in that sense, he doesn't see that the Commonwealth was somehow a new creation at any point in its history. And as he put it in the very beginning of his book, there could have been no Commonwealth had there not been a British Empire. Equally, there could have been no Commonwealth but for the negation, withdrawal, and transformation of British imperialism. So his view, which I must admit I tend to subscribe to, is that it was an organic development, and you therefore should not really pick a specific date but see it as a progress, and it's not founded in 1949 or even 1931 with roots earlier. It was simply an ongoing process that the empire turned into the Commonwealth, and that is why he believes that you cannot join the Commonwealth, you have to grow out of the Commonwealth. But as I said, his view has recently been rejected in the sense that Mozambique and Rwanda now belong. So therefore, from certainly Walker's view and the traditional view of an empire, what is an empire out of which the Commonwealth came? Well, one of the most important things, I think, of an empire is that it transcends a nation. A single nation does not an empire make. There's two uses of the term imperial. England used to refer to this England as an empire unto itself. There's that sense, which means fully sovereign. But in the way we're using the British Empire, that type of empire, not a sort of domestic sovereignty, but in terms of a wider community, involves more than one nation. The British Empire, of course, was a multinational, multiracial, multi-religious empire. But England and Britain have been part of several empires. A matter of fact, being British has almost always included an imperial identity. Now, the nature of those empires, and I'm going to identify 5 if you count the Commonwealth as an extension, but 4 prior to the Commonwealth, were very different, but they were still empires. The first was the Roman Empire, and England was part of the Roman Empire. The difference, of course, was that England, or London, was not the metropolis. Rome was the metropolis. England's position in the Roman Empire was more akin to the colonies in Africa or Asia or the Middle East, or even, if you want to include Canada, Australia, there were more settler colonies, but the English were incorporated into the Britons, into the Roman Empire, and they were the backwater. But of course London was founded by the Romans, Londinium, which now we know as London. So that empire lasted from 55 BC, when Julius Caesar landed, to roughly 10 when the Roman legions were recalled in the decline of the Roman Empire and Britain was abandoned. So for almost 500 years, 465 years, a fairly long time, almost half a millennium, Britain was part of an other empire, but the empire, in that case the Roman imperial tradition, was part of the identity of being Britain. The next empire, following the so-called Dark Ages, if you will, when Britain was often raided by Vikings and Angles and Saxons and so on, but we can move perhaps to the Norman conquest. William the Conqueror of Normandy, who conquers England in 1066, thus uniting Normandy with England. And that was expanded by William's granddaughter, or great-grandson to be more exact, William's granddaughter Matilda, who was the first woman to try to claim the throne of England, unsuccessfully, because her cousin Stephen had a better army, and people thought, not wasn't so much that women could not ever be monarch, but a woman could not command the forces to defend the country. So the end of the Civil War was an agreement that Stephen would reign, not Matilda, but the succession would go through Matilda, who had the better claim by primogeniture, to her son and not to Stephen's descendants. So Matilda's son came to the throne as Henry II. Now Matilda's husband was Geoffrey of Anjou, and thus Henry II, when he came to the throne of England, was also Duke of Normandy and also the Count of Anjou. So you now had a Norman, English, Angevin empire. It was a European empire, but it was pretty extensive, and it included most of what's now modern-day France. So this empire, in this case, initially London, again, was not the center of this empire, but it soon became the center, though the other capitals in Normandy and on Anjou were also important, but eventually the monarch's main residence, if you will, was London. Not always. Someone like Richard the Lionheart spent most of his time in France and the Holy Land, not in England. But eventually London became the center of that empire.